Hello and welcome to this masterclass, webinar, whatever you want to call it. Basically what I'm trying to do here is share some of our learning and just as much our experience and our mistakes when it comes to making videos in the finance space for your benefit. And this is going to be really jam-packed. I know that these things can be a bit boring and full of waffle and self-aggrandizement and promotion. So what I really want to do is I want you to walk away with real nuggets of learning that you can directly apply to your businesses or your operations this afternoon if you want to. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. If you've got questions, just ask them as we go along. I've got Tom who's going to kind of alert me to any questions that come up, and we'll answer them as we go along. And there'll be a recording of this afterwards if anybody wants a copy. So you probably, first place to start is who are Real Vision? Why have I got any credibility in this space at all? We are a video on demand channel where basically the world's smartest investors share their best ideas. Many people have described it as TED Talks meets The Economist. And what we mean by that is super smart people and deep dive insights into finance. Other people have described it as Netflix for finance because it works just like Netflix. So you get home pages on your screen. You've got lots of different carousels. Instead of romance, comedy, drama, we've got things like equities, crypto, gold. And you choose what you want to watch, and then you can go on down that rabbit hole of content as much as you wish. It's a freemium subscription model, so we have free content and we also have paid for content. We have a global audience with 3 million views each month, and we do long form content. Everybody will tell you that nobody has an attention span anymore. This is the first kind of lesson of the day. When it comes to finance, that's absolute rubbish. And what we've found is that doing content that's less than 30 minutes long, very often on our platform just doesn't work. And the reason is if somebody is investing a lot of money, or they're thinking about their pension, or they're thinking about saving for a college fund or whatever it might be, then 3 minutes is just not enough to help them. They really want to understand it. And at the end of that content, they want to be able to make a decision. So we've shifted all of our content to long form. We have all our production is done in-house. We filmed in 27 different countries around the world. And we have record-breaking viewer engagement rates. And what I mean by that is the average YouTube video has 22% engagement. The average Facebook video has 4% engagement. Our engagement is 82%. And what that means is people are watching that amount of our content. And the reason we break those records is A, because we understand how important this is. So we've got a bit of a cheat there, because if you are trying to make an investment decision, you're not going to cut out after halfway through. You need to get the full story. So that plays to our favor. And also some of the things I'm going to talk about today that enable us to get people to watch for longer. Little kind of tricks of the trade. So Creative Studios is the part of Real Vision that works for other clients. And why are so many finance brands moving to video? When we started 6 years ago, the idea of finance businesses making video was just totally surreal. But now there's been a massive shift in perceptions. As you can see some of the stats here, 80% of marketers say videos helped increase video website traffic and leads. 95% of the message is retained when watching the video. It's why YouTube is the go-to place for anything where you want to learn something. All those how-to videos, whether it's how to fix something on your car engine or how to make a wristband, it all is driven by video. So it's a very powerful medium when you want to share information and you want people to learn something. Many, many shares. You'll know that from your Instagram and Twitter feeds. And 40% of marketers now rank videos as the content with the very best ROI. So that's best of all media out there. So there's a huge shift towards video. And the companies we work with globally are companies like JP Morgan, UBS, TPICAT, Refinitiv, Cornerstone Macro, Bray. The list goes on and on and on. We work with large companies and small companies, and we work globally. And why do they work with us? Because it's a kind of a yin and yang thing, I guess. Half our organization, half our company are people who are ex-Goldman Sachs, ex-Deutsche Bank, some of the biggest finance institutions in the world. And the other half come from, like myself, advertising, marketing, psychology, filmmaking. And so those two worlds kind of collide to enable us to create great content. If you work in finance now and you want to make a video, you probably won't be very good at it because you don't understand how video works. So what you might do is you might get a local video company in. There are loads of them. You probably know Uncle Bob knows how to use a video camera. The trouble is they'll make a video and it'll be lit well and it'll be the sound will be good, but they won't understand how to cut that video and how to tell the story because they don't understand finance. So either way, you're kind of constricted, and we are able to bring those two worlds together. And what we do is we advise on video strategy. So sometimes we don't make videos at all. We just advise on the content strategy for video, and we present to boards or marketing teams. Others, we develop creative proposals to meet strategic objectives. So you say, I'm trying to do this, and we show you how to do it with video. Obviously, we make the videos, and we can also provide distribution. So through our YouTube channel, which has got 350,000 very engaged, financially astute investors, traders, and financially interested audiences, we can do that. And as I said, we've got a 3 million global reach in terms of views each month. So that's us. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've also done some things that work, so I can bring all that together in this. And I think the first thing to remember is that communication is changing very, very fast at the moment. It is not like it was even 2 or 3 years ago. The digital shift has led to a massive change in the way brands need to communicate. And essentially, social media has given consumers a voice and a means of them coming together. So what that's really meant is that brands can't anymore do what they used to do, which is just deliver an unchallenged statement or monologue. You know, they would just put out a commercial and that was it. Brands are no longer revered in the same way. There's a very different way we treat brands, and everybody feels very able to criticize or comment or review any brand. So that dynamic, that power shift, the balance of power has changed enormously. And what it's meant is brand communication has got to be more of a conversation. It can't be a monologue. And trust within communication has moved much more towards people like me or people who understand me. So that's why people are much more likely to trust an Amazon review than a New York Times book review. They're much more likely to trust somebody else on Airbnb and what they think of a place, or TripAdvisor, than a hotel guide or a newspaper. And there's loads of research in this space that basically all the dynamics of trust in terms of corporations and brands has changed. And it's much more about dialogue. It's much more about people like me. It's much more about empathy. So the way you communicate has got to change. The problem with that is finance just has not caught up as an industry. It's still very, very reliant on baby boomers. Now, baby boomers, the older generation, are still the people who, it's fair to say, have more trust of brands. There's a lot of research in that space, more trust in organizations and institutions. And because the finance industry has ridden the baby boomer wave for the last 30 years, they're very reliant on that audience, and they're very scared to move away from it because there's still a lot of value in that audience. But what it means is they tend to be using methods of communication that are increasingly outdated, but are also alienating younger audiences. Many finance brands still haven't recognized the fatal blow of the 2008 crash and what that meant in terms of credibility and engagement. There is that crisis led to a huge crisis of confidence in financial institutions and a lack of trust and a cynicism that is still very, very pervasive. Finance brands are still obsessed with white papers and numbers and analyst reports, and that's the way the business is structured and the way the research is built around it. They still think that trust means suits, old white men, oak desks, white hair, big atriums, Doric columns, for God's sake. It's a very stereotypical, very old-fashioned perception of how you build trust. And the world has vastly moved away from that. And unfortunately, financial institutions haven't remembered that. And then there's the coronavirus impact, which obviously we can't ignore, but it has very much changed the way people want information within the market space. It's a huge reset opportunity. And it's the only time in global history that everybody on the planet has experienced the same thing at the same time. Usually there's a ripple of something happening across the world, be that a disease or a news or something like that, or wars even haven't touched every country on the planet. So this is the first time we've had a shared experience globally at the same time. Everybody knows, whether you're in finance or not, that nobody knows the answers. Everybody knows that there are no solutions. So what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of finance brands are slightly paralyzed because they feel that they have to be the experts. That's what they're used to being. They feel that they have to give answers and deep analysis, and they're worried because they don't know what the answers are. So they're paralyzed and they don't quite know what to do. What they're failing to recognize is that what consumers want right now is they just want to know what you're thinking. They want to know where your heads are. They know that you don't know. They don't expect you to be the guru. They just want to know what's in your head, what you think might happen, and how you're preparing for it. And the ones that are succeeding are the brands that are engaging in an ongoing dialogue, rather than the ones that are saying very bland, crass things like, "We're here for you," which doesn't really mean anything to anybody. And there's a lot of cynicism around those kind of statements. Or the brands that are holding back because they don't know what to say, because they don't know the answers. Or the brands that are saying, "This is what's going to happen." And again, nobody trusts that. So the best mode of communication right now within finance is to try to explain what's happening rather than to give answers, to explain what you're thinking rather than to give people solutions. And that's a bit of a kind of mind shift for finance organizations. And we're working with a lot of companies on that, but it's definitely something that's very prevalent at the moment. So there is a new communication paradigm. Consumers have a voice. They're very different nowadays. They want a conversation more than anything else. There's a lot of distrust in the sector, and that's been exacerbated again by the rise of fake news, corporate data usage. There's a lot of distrust, particularly financial organizations. There are now more millennials in the workplace than any other generation, so you have to be shifting your focus towards that audience. It still terrifies me that the average age of an audience on CNBC, I think, is 63, and on Bloomberg is 67 years old. So you've got to be thinking about the younger audience and the way they are thinking about the world and the way they are engaging, because they are going to be the future of your financial organization. And the longer you take to focus on them, the more you will be rejected by more of them, because they have very different media and brand engagement preferences. Okay, the coronavirus, of course, has opened minds to new ways forward for all of us. The faster you can get onto that bandwagon, the better. We normally hold conferences. We held a conference in August on cryptocurrencies. We had 8,000 people attend that event online, and they paid. We've just done one on learning about finance. We had 6,000 people engaged, all paying, and we had 2,000 people at any one time in the chat rooms debating and asking questions and following up afterwards with all sorts of conversations. So the world is changing. We're now doing online events for other brands. But my point is that you've got to grab this change and go with it rather than wait for things to go back to normal. So how do you get it wrong? So I said that we've made a lot of mistakes, but everybody's making mistakes in this space. So let me give you some of the examples. Think about an average finance video. Just for a moment, just think about what kind of spokesperson does a normal finance video have, or a finance brand do? What kind of clothing are they wearing? What's the setting or the location? What kind of props or charts do they have around them? What's the tone of voice? And very quickly, you get to this. You get to blues and grays. You get to elderly men. You get to suits and ties. You get to cityscapes. You get to logos. You get to tickers. You get to lots of numbers. And this is the model that's been established by the major financial media outlets, but it's the one that is copied by so many finance brands out there. Let me just play you a quick video of a classic finance video. This is one we came across recently.
The business cycle remains the most important driver of asset prices over time. We divide the business cycle into 6 distinct stages, each stage presenting challenges to navigate from an investment perspective, but also offering exciting opportunities. Let's go through my first slide. What I've outlined for you here.
So that is clearly a terrible video, but it's a classic finance video. And let me tell you some of the problems with it. So I mentioned he's wearing a suit and tie. Now, obviously, you might think, well, look, we're a finance company. You know, we're not kind of rock and roll. We need people to trust us. We need people to engage with us. We need to look like we're serious and professional. And all of that kind of makes sense. But what we see is with all audiences, from institutional investors right through to the general public, that when you see somebody in a suit like that delivering a finance video, they're in work mode. They are in sell mode. They are talking to a script and they have an agenda. And therefore, instantly, psychological barriers go up. You lean back and you feel that this is a pitch rather than useful information. There's a very different way that you engage with it. That's compounded by the fact that he's sat at a desk. Sounds like a small thing. A desk is great if you're running an interview and you want to do a power play where you are the power and the representational authority of the company, and the candidate is kind of, you're slightly intimidating them behind on the other side of the desk. But in this case, it's a barrier. It's a very physical barrier, but it also creates a psychological barrier between you, the audience, and that person talking to you. He's also got a screen there. Now, he's put a screen there because he wants to show or give the implication that he's looking at the business, looking at the charts, looking at the markets, looking at the data. But actually, it's just another barrier. He's seeing stuff that you can't, and that, again, creates a psychological distance between you. And then he's in an office, which reinforces the fact that this is work. This is a way of him selling to you. It's in business mode. It's a terrible office. It doesn't actually add anything to the communication. It has no kind of scale or drama to it. So all of those things together combine to put viewers off. And then you look at the charts, you know, you can't read the title because what they've done, as you can see at the bottom, is they've taken a chart from a print report, an analyst report. And it might work in print, but it doesn't work on video. The title can't be read. The key can't be read. They've got two grays in there, which are hard to differentiate. As I've said, it's a print chart, and the signage of trying to understand what everything stands for just doesn't work. And you're right, Robert has just said about the eye of the person who just did that video. He's not even looking at you. He's slightly looking away. So all of that gives you this sense that you're on the outside. And what happens is people close down. Okay, so how do you shake that up? I'm going to show you now a Real Vision video. So this goes on our platform to our audience. I'm not suggesting it's the kind of content that you might be able to do for your finance brands. It's what we do for our brand. It's right for our brand. But I want to use it to just signpost some different ways of thinking about finance content.
Hi, I'm Raoul Powell. Today I'm going to sit down with Keith McCulloch of Hedgeye. And really, I've got Keith here for one particular thing because I want to ask him one pointed question. Keith, what the fuck's going on?
Well, let me tell you, it's easy.
Yeah, but I mean, there is so much going on, right?
Yeah.
And the market narrative's shifting. I see you guys are kind of shifting around with, you know, which quad and things are moving.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are struggling to make sense of it because they look at asset prices in equity markets, they see all-time highs, they're saying, well, everything's perfect. And it is becoming a complicated situation, which is kind of precisely why you're in business to do what you do and why you've got a framework. So talk us through a bit of how you see things, and we'll just kick it around from there and see where we get to.
Yeah, for the last year, I think that it was a relatively easy
so if we can just click on.
to understand.
So what you see there is a very different kind of engagement. So let's start with the language. So obviously, you know, what the fuck is going on isn't necessarily the thing that you might be able to get away with corporately at your organizations. But what we've found is that it instantly cuts through and says to your audience, it's like a signal that says to your audience, this isn't like a normal finance video. We're going to get to the guts of this. Now, our brand can do that. You don't need to swear to be able to do it. But there are other ways of using language to say to your audience, this isn't like everything else that is out there. The setting, it's not an office. It's more relaxed. It's a different kind of environment, and that instantly signals to the audience, oh, this is more like a chat than like an interview. The mannerisms. So Raoul's using his hands and waving around. He's not got a script. He's not reading off an auto prompter, and you can tell because he stumbles and makes a couple of mistakes. He's sat there wearing trainers and bracelets. There's a coffee cup there. What all of those things do is they say, this isn't a sales pitch. This isn't a presentation. This is a chat that we are allowing you, the viewer, to listen in on. And what Raoul, the guy on the left, is doing is he's the proxy for the audience. He's kind of asking the questions that you want to ask. That's his role in this. So there are very clearly assigned roles for people and very carefully considered ways of staging the film. So that's how we do it. But what are the top 5 mistakes that we see out there? The first one, and the biggest one, is probably that people have a written report, some kind of insight into the researchers, the analysts have gone off and done some work, and they've done some work on a particular subject, and they say, great, let's make that a video. And what they do is they get the analyst to talk to camera and basically deliver their report to a video camera. Now, that isn't a video. That is a written report on a video. And there's a huge difference, because unless you play to the strengths of video, then frankly, you shouldn't bother. Video plays very differently because it is a much more visual medium. So you've got to work with the medium rather than just take a written report and slam it onto film. You get rabbit in the headlights presenters. So again, people think, well, this analyst wrote the report, so he should be the person to present it, or the CEO or the head of marketing is the most important person in the department, therefore they need to deliver the presentation. But you know what? Sometimes they're just not very good on camera. Sometimes they're not people. They're not very good at creating empathy, or they might be great at their jobs, but that's different to being able to carry an audience with you. So, there are ways around that, but you've got to be aware that just because they're senior or just because they've written something doesn't mean they're the best person for that job. Or people look out there and they say, well, we want to be serious and formal. The only benchmarks are Bloomberg or CNBC or Newsnight on the BBC. So we've got to be like that. Hence the sense of everybody doing the same thing, the blue and the gray and the suits and the office environment and the kind of hard-hitting interview style. Honestly, you'll never be as good as Bloomberg or CNBC at doing it. And I don't think that's even a very good benchmark anyway. But you'll never be as good even as them. So just don't bother. Because it's like trying to do a movie and comparing yourself to Spielberg. You'll never do it to the same quality. So try and play a different game. Features, not benefits. This is a kind of a marketing thing. What a lot of people do is they tell the audience what they are doing and what their new product is and what the interest rate is and how hard they've worked on it. And that's all features. And actually what you should always focus on are the benefits for the consumer. Start with what your consumer wants and what they need and what you are giving them rather than what you are doing. Sounds super obvious. Everybody in marketing should know this, but it's incredibly hard when you've created a product that you're trying to launch, kind of not to start there mentally and talk about your product. The most brilliant way of thinking about this is one of the people at Black & Decker, the drill maker, once said, we don't sell drills, we sell holes. And I think that's kind of sums it up really, which is think about the benefit, the end game. What does the consumer actually want? They don't want a drill. They want a hole in their wall or in a piece of wood. So work to that rather than what your product is. And then the other big problem is people don't have an end game. You have this kind of harebrained shift towards video because everyone's making videos. We need to make videos as well. But they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know what they want people to do next. There's no goal. There's no objective. So if you don't have an objective, you're just spewing out content into a world that's already got too much content. Okay, so how do you get it right? What's the point? Well, I'm going to show you 4 or 5 things with some short video clips to bring each one to life so you can get a sense of how we think and how we work. So the first one is know what your viewers are going to get out of the film. Why should they bother watching it? So really early on in your video, ideally in the first 5-10 seconds, explain to them why they should bother, what they're going to get, and give them a sizzle, give them a taste of what lies ahead. So I'm going to give you a short example here. I'm going to play a short video, and I'll talk about that in a sec.
My first question was the obvious one. Why should I care about silver, and why now? What makes this moment in time so special for silver?
So this is a video that we make. It's as part of a series that we make for a number of organizations, and it's called Why Now? And the basic premise is, why should I invest in this now? In that case, it was silver. At other times, it's been gold mining. At other times, it's been digital gold. But the point is very quickly and straight up front, we're alerting our audience into what they're going to get out of this video and why they should watch it. Patrick, you've just asked a question about if you've got terrible presenters in-house. One of the things to do is use your analyst or use your expert, as it were, not as the person who carries the show, but who is the person who kind of fills in the gaps. So, for example, we did a film recently with a very bad analyst who just couldn't present for toffee. So we brought in one of our hosts who carried the show, told the story, told the narrative, and then would cut to a point where they'd say, but to deep dive into a bit more detail, let's cut to John, who can explain this, And then what happens is the presenter, they're kind of allowed to be a bad presenter because the audience recognize that that's not what they do. What they are is the expert on the subject. So they do that bit, and then you go back to the presenter who says, so I think what John's trying to say there, what's important about what John said was, and the presenter is the person who carries the narrative. So that's one trick you can use. There are others, but I can talk to you about that afterwards if that helps. Okay, another thing, focus on the negatives. There's a thing called resentful deafness. And what that is when your audience, and we all do it in our personal lives as well, which is if someone's trying to tell you something, but you've got a kind of a nagging doubt at the back of your head, you actually don't listen to them. You just think, yeah, but. So that nagging voice at the back of your head, that blocker that stops you listening to the message. And it often trips up marketing teams because they obviously just want to focus on the good of their product and how brilliant it is. But actually, a really good discipline is to think about the negatives as well, because if you can focus on the negatives, you'll flush out a better story and better messaging, but also you'll understand better what the audience blockers are. I think the best example of this for anybody in the UK is Marmite, who for years ran campaigns on advertising. Marmite is a kind of a spread for bread that is meat-based, and you either love it, you love it, or you just find it disgusting. And they ran for years campaigns telling people how good it was, and basically people said, well, I love it, but I other people hated it. And eventually, about 10 years ago, they changed the whole strategy, and they said, love it or hate it. And that was the whole strategy was built around that. And of course, it's been a phenomenal success because they recognize the weakness. So I'm just going to show you now a little research group that we videoed about what millennials think of boomers and what they think boomers think of millennials. How do you think other generations think millennials handle their money?
Poorly?
Yeah. I mean, there was that whole thing with like Chase Bank's Monday motivation, where it's like, oh, don't spend on that extra fucking avocado.
Yeah, avocado toast.
That's a jet. I think it's stupid. I mean, we're looking at a generation, like 80% of them haven't started like getting to the point where they can retire, and they're already starting to reach that age. So for them to look at us and say, you mismanage your money, it's like, well, shit, at least I have a chance. Compared to you.
I just think that's a really interesting video in the sense that obviously that Chase Bank had run a campaign about avocado toast because they were targeting millennials, and how it was completely rejected by the audience, and showed just how cliched and stereotyped they felt they were being perceived by financial institutions, and they rejected. I mean, it's a classic case of that kind of resentful deafness. And you have to confront these things. And whatever your business, is not just about different generations. Your audience will have blockers. And if you don't understand them, you will not be able to get your message out. The other thing is, think about your experts, your team, whoever you've got on video. Think about them as people, not as professions. So don't think about them as kind of analysts. Think about them as people, because if you want your audience to listen to you and trust you, you've got to give it a head start. And there are a lot of studies that show that if you can make mistakes, if you can laugh at yourself, if you can show your human side, people are more likely to like you. But of course, we're all wrapped up in finance, and we think, oh no, we can't have fun because this is a finance. We're a finance brand, and we need people to trust us and think we're taking this seriously because it's their money, it's their lives, it's their pensions. But actually, loads of research shows that really people buy people, and we experimented this with JP Morgan, and this is part of a show that we do for them where we have different analysts saying what they think is going to happen in the month ahead, and we moved from them just introducing themselves to showing kind of outtakes, mistakes, them mucking around, them laughing, and what we found was willingness to listen shot through the roof, willingness to believe, willingness to trust, viewer engagement through the length of the video. Everything changed when we moved to this kind of introduction of our 3 analysts. I'll just play it now.
Smile. Looking at the camera?
What was my leg?
I used her line.
And I'm sorry. All right,
Here we go.
I'm ready. You're not going to look at me, you're looking at the camera.
I'm Clay, and in January, I'm focused on dividend-paying equities.
I'm Eric, and in January, I'm focused on having a plan.
My name's Jeannie, and I think January is when you should put your money where your mouth is.
Laugh. You can see that they're friends. You can see that they come across as nice people. And obviously, we had a huge kind of debate battle with JP Morgan to say we want to go to this. We want to go to this model, which is more relaxed. They, credit to them, went with it. And of course, everything shot through the roof in terms of engagement. So you do have to take these risks, but they do pay off. You need clear navigation. You need really simple signposting, and you need reasons to believe. If any of you do, conference presentations, you'll be told, tell people what you're going to say, tell them, and then tell them what you've just told them. And it sounds a bit basic, but navigation and carrying people through your narrative, through your argument is super important. And particularly when it comes to finance. So here's how we do it, for example, using charts.
Given that the majority of shale drilling companies weren't profitable with oil above 42.5, then the situation with oil down in the 30s is very drastic.
So that's just a really simple example of how you can work with a chart on video to tell a story and draw people's attention to things and make things clear where you're helping them understand it versus them reading a chart in print where they've got to work it all out for themselves. And often they won't see the significance of some things. Create a story. Again, people think, right, I've got a bunch of facts here, or I've got something I've got to tell people, and they just dive in. They just go straight to the nub of what they want to say. And you've got to carry your audience with you, and you've got to think about the narrative arc. And you may or may not know this, but every play, every opera, every story, even songs have a narrative arc. There is a way of telling a story. And it generally falls into a number of parts. Usually it's 3 acts, but they are further broken down into, okay, where were we? What was the state of the world previously? Then something happens. It's called the catalytic incident or the shift. Something changes. Then the middle part of any story is usually a quest or a mission. What are we trying to achieve? So in Harry Potter, it's trying to get rid of Voldemort. Who's working for us and who's against us? Who are our friends and our foes? And what signifies success? Getting rid of Voldemort and the Death Eaters. And the future will be, okay, what does the new world look like? Now, every story in the world works to that format, potentially not Ulysses by James Joyce, but pretty much everything else. It can also work like that in finance. So if you take this narrative arc and you think, where were we? We had a world of petrol and diesel cars that were the norm. The shift was the launch of Tesla. The quest was for Tesla to challenge bigger and richer conventional car manufacturers to make electric cars the propulsion of choice. Their friends were early adopters. The enemies were oil and car industries. The showdown, or one of the showdowns, was, will Tesla beat Toyota to become the world's most valuable car manufacturer? And in the end, the future is electric cars are the new norm for every manufacturer, and Tesla lead the way. And now they're on a new quest and a new battle and a new narrative arc, which is, can they fight off BMW and Mercedes and Apple as they bring out their electric cars? The point here is there is a story, and stories work because we're incredibly familiar with them. Since the dawn of time, if any of you know Fahrenheit 451, you'll know the power of stories and how they have a structure. So work with that. It is to your advantage to turn your video into a story. And here's an example of just the opening of a video that we did recently. And it feels like a story.
Right. Morning, everyone. Morning. Have we got the keys? Got the keys? Great. I'm Jamie McDonald, and I was a fund manager in London and New York for 10 years. In that time, ESG investing was certainly something we talked about, but it wasn't something that really mattered. And it didn't matter because it couldn't be valued, and therefore it didn't really affect market sentiment. But now I've got a feeling that's going to change. We're off to Davos, the World Economic Forum, a melting pot of business, politics and finance. And we're going to get underneath the skin of the key question this year, which is, what is the future of capitalism and how can we sustain our economic system for future generations?
Now that video went on YouTube. It's had well over 100,000 views. We did that in association with Refinitiv, who were a fantastic partner on this because they wanted to do a series of interviews at Davos about ESG, and they allowed us to turn it into this story of, and the arc was a cynical hedge fund guy, the one that you saw there, starting out the day, quite cynical about ESG and greenwash, interviewing people throughout the day, backed up by data from Refinitiv, and then at the end of the day, driving home, and as he drives home, it's the reverse. He's driving at sunset, and it's getting darker, and he says, do you know what? I feel I've really learned something, and I think there really is a tipping point in ESG. So there's a very clear narrative arc. It was a story, and the results have proved themselves in terms of the views that it's had. But every film can have a story, no matter how long it is. You should also scare yourself. You've got to understand that there is too much content out there. There is now more content in a Sunday newspaper, one Sunday newspaper, than a person in the 15th century would have been exposed to in their entire lives. There is just too much. So what we do is we edit out. We don't judge things on their merits. We edit out. We just take the simplest, easiest option. So in order to cut through, you've got to be ballsy. You've got to be creative. You've got to take risks. And if you aren't scared, if you aren't nervous when you show whatever you're making in terms of content in marketing to your boss, your finance director, your board, if you're not nervous, it is not going to work. It will not cut through. You might feel comfortable. You might feel good about it. It might get signed off, but it is not going to cut through. And even if it does, it's shocking how quickly it normalizes and people are ready to move on. So you can't just do it once. You have to keep doing it again and again. So we worked with a brand called investing.com who wanted a kind of wrap up at the end of every day about what had happened in the New York markets that day. And they came to us with a film, which was a guy in a suit with a kind of iPad in his hand and a big Bloomberg screen behind him or a Refinitiv screen behind him, talking about the markets that day. And they said, could we shake it up a bit? This was going out on television in Asia, actually. And this next video is what we showed them. And this is what we made.
Bloody October is bleeding into November, and even rallying FANG stocks can't mask the month's steep losses. Facebook posted a quarterly revenue miss that was outshone by above forecast earnings, sending shares more than 3% higher. But the social media giant is still on track to end October about 10% lower. CEO Mark Zuckerberg tempered expectations somewhat on an earnings call when he said 2019 would be an investment year for the company as it looks to shore up the security of its social media platform.
That's quite easy to look at that and think, oh, wow, yes, that looks interesting. And I'm sure that did well against, younger audiences, millennials. What was fascinating is that show outperformed its big competitor, much bigger competitor. It outperformed it in its time slot. And also it pulled in audiences across all age groups and all professions, or in terms of finance people as well as non-finance people. It was just interesting. The content was still the same content you'd have done with a guy in a suit reading to camera. It was just dressed up in a creative and innovative way. And I think that's a trick to remember, which is if the content is solid, then you've got a lot of latitude creatively to play with it and have fun with it and draw people in and engage with them in different ways. So those are a whole bunch of different ideas I've tried to give you. I've tried to show you things that people do wrong. I've tried to show you things that can help you get it right. I just want to kind of sum up, and then if there are any questions, anything you want to ask, very happy to discuss it, and I'll just go back over a couple of others that have come up already. The bottom line here is that whether you're doing it or not, whether you like it or not, video is becoming the medium of choice. If you look at Morgan Stanley, for example, they make 1,000 videos a year. It is vastly preferred by consumers. Consumers cannot be bothered anymore to read through a 100-page report, even a 20-page report, on whatever it might be. There are things that video can do that you can't do in print. You can tell a story in a different way. You can use music. You can use visual effects. You can use B-roll, stock footage. You can bring things to life and make a subject interesting. We did a video about the pension crisis and the problems around pension savings. We put it out on YouTube. It's a 50-minute long video. So far, I think it's had 1.7 million views and 6,000 comments on YouTube. People will engage if you can tell the story in the right way. Often people say to us, but it's finance, it's a bit boring. No, there's a lot you can do. Financial institutions need to catch up, because it's no good saying, yeah, but finance is different. If your audience are moving towards video, you need to be there as well. You have to catch up. It demands a very different way of thinking about messaging. One of the things in video is a thing called neural mirroring, and that's where it's a psychological thing where we reflect back what we see. So if you've ever sold cars, for example, you'll be your car salesman. You'll be told very early on, when you talk about the price, nod and smile a lot, and nod and say the price is going to be this, and what you get is this. And what happens is, we as the consumer nod back. It's called neural mirroring. We can't help it. It's a bit like if someone yawns in a lift, it's almost impossible for someone else not to yawn. If you look at a row of kids in a classroom and you see someone sat like that, almost invariably you'll see other people sat like that. And other people call it postural echo. The point is that in video, you can really work with your audience to take them to different places psychologically, because they can see you, they can feel your energy or your dynamism or whatever it might be, how serious you are, but they reflect that back. So there are things you can do with video you can't do with print. It demands a different way of messaging, which I've just touched on. There are also many different ways of harnessing creativity. Don't feel that you have to do what you've always done or what everyone else done. And, you know, I'd like to say that we're pretty good at this stuff. I'd like to say I think we're probably the best in the world, because I don't know anybody else doing it on the scale we're doing it within finance. And that's why, you know, we do run these kind of seminars, we do webinars, we do presentations to boards, we do presentations with marketing teams. There's just a question come in from Joel. So that's, you know, I'm just going to go to your question in a minute, Joel. That's us. I don't want to kind of go on. Hopefully there's enough there where if you want to follow up with a conversation or questions, really happy to. I don't expect you to come and commission us. You know, it's not, I don't like that way of working. I'm very happy to help. And if you think we can add something, then great. And if we don't, then let's just have a nice chat. Joel, you talked about podcasts. There's been a massive shift to podcasts within finance, particularly over COVID, where people realized that they needed new forms of communicating. Podcasts are good. Undoubtedly, they're very successful. I think there is a proliferation of them at the moment, and it's getting harder to stand out. Podcasts are a move on from print because you get some sense of personality. The worst ones, I think, are when you it feels like it's an interview, but it's an audio interview that doesn't really have a narrative arc. It doesn't have a journey that it's trying to take you on. There's no end game to it. And they kind of sprawl, and they're not delivered in a way that's engaging. They're not designed to be engaging. It's much easier to do that on video because you've just got more senses to play with, and you can add more layers to the communication. One of the things we find, for example, when we're making a video, is if we cut from one camera angle to a different camera angle, just that movement, that shift, it's like a little wake-up call for your audience, and they'll look up again. So we very often use unusual camera angles, for example, which will bring your audience, bring their attention back into focus. Those are things you can do in video with music or with title charts. They're harder to do on podcasts. So although I think podcasts are amazing and we do a lot, we've got 500,000 downloads for ours on Real Vision, video I think does have the edge. Robert, video podcasts. Okay, so video podcasts work if the podcast is really good. If the podcast is good, then the video podcast will be good. So I think they kind of go hand in hand. So you talk about Joe Rogan, yeah, absolutely. But let's face it, that's one of the best podcasts in the world. So you know that stands on its own 2 feet as a audio podcast. Therefore, it will always work as a video podcast. It's a device that people use because they think it's a quick and easy way to create some video content. It is, but it's relatively one-dimensional because your audience, when you get to video, their expectations are just raised because they know there are things you can do with video that you can't do with a podcast. They know that you can have B-roll and music and effects and graphics and animated charts and all sorts of things. So their expectations are higher, and if all you're doing is with a locked-off camera filming an audio podcast, then you won't deliver against those expectations. And although it'll be okay, it won't be the most engaging way of communicating with your audience. But listen, if it's all you can do, it's definitely a step in the right direction, and it's definitely a way of testing video and testing ways of getting in front of your audience. Okay, I think we're pretty much bang on time. Obviously, if there are any questions, really happy to help. Really happy to follow up with anybody because I know it's always awkward and embarrassing asking questions on these things. I rarely do it. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope there's some learning in there. And if you want to share this or want me to speak to anyone in your teams, very happy to. As I say, we're really open here, very honest, and very willing to help. Okay, that's it. I will leave you to get back to whatever you are doing. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for listening.